trigger warning for anyone with a sensitive stomach. When I was a sophomore in high school, there was this new guy that moved into town, Matt. Matt played guitar, and I was a singer. Our love was meant to be. We started dating when I was a junior and he was a senior. I was 16, he was 17. Honestly, it was a super cute romance that would likely make a decent Wattpad story, but it wasn't meant to last, as I was moving to a new state at the start of my senior year. This story takes place about 2 weeks before the end of my junior year, and the school and town are getting ready for senior graduation. The characters in this story: OP, I'm the girlfriend. Matt is the boyfriend. Griffin is our bad friend. Henry is a good friend. SDP stands for Super Dead Possum. Alright, jumping right in. Matt was my first everything. Losing my V card wasn't great, but is it ever? For everyone's sake, I hope that I'm wrong. Matt and I were awkward, but managed to talk boundaries before anything happened between us. In this conversation, we agreed that it was really important to both of us that this stayed private. Absolutely no bragging or being weird around friends. Griffin was a senior, and someone who was in our group of friends, but not exactly a close friend of either of us. We were all in either orchestra, choir, and/or band. Everyone in those programs ran in the same social circle. Griffin was a Christian, and it was a big part of his identity while we were at school. He had this charisma or charm or something. He used to invite classmates to his church while gently shaming all of us for not exactly being like him. Even though he was a bummer to be around, his whatever charisma kept him active in the social scene, and he was at all of the major hangouts I can remember during that time. I was friendly with Griffin because, to put it simply, I lacked confidence. I grew up in a church where I was taught that men were more important than me, to never question a man. My own mother shamed me for wearing my volleyball uniform at home because it was inappropriate and could confuse my brother. Fucked up doesn't even begin to cover that church or the amount that I had to unlearn. By the time I was 17, I was fully done with church, but still struggled with all I'd been taught. It was a confusing time. Griffin knew this, and his self-assigned senior project was getting me back into the church. I'm 99% sure that it was only about getting Matt involved because Griffin also wanted Matt to be a Christian, but had so far been massively unsuccessful. Matt was not the religious type and had zero desire to know any more about them. He saw firsthand how the church treated me and my family after some shit happened that was out of our control. Matt, not a fan. I kept a journal during that time in my life because if I didn't, I'm sure I would have done something terrible to myself. My journal was plain, nothing on it to draw attention because I never wanted my family to think that it was a journal. It was supposed to look just like any other school notebook. One day during lunch, I was at my usual table where Griffin sat. I realized that I needed something from the choir room, so I left my stuff at the lunch table, not thinking anything about leaving my backpack there. I had no idea anyone would go through my stuff because that had never happened before, and I didn't have anything of value in there anyway. But as it turns out, my journal ended up being valuable because I had written about Matt and myself in it. Griffin thought that he had ammunition to get me back into the church, and I'm assuming Matt was just supposed to join us. Griffin proceeded to take my journal and tell basically everyone in our social group, which led to most of the school knowing. A private moment became everyone's, and it was fucking humiliating. Thankfully, Matt didn't blame me, even though I felt like it was my fault. He was more confident than I was, but also didn't get nearly the same shame thrown his way that I was getting. I knew I was leaving in a few months, so I tried to keep my head down and just focus on school, but being called a whore and a slut by people that I grew up with nonetheless, it grates on you after a while. I guess Griffin's plan was to shame me back into church, but instead, all I wanted before leaving town was to ruin him. It took some time, but eventually I got there. Matt, Henry, and I were hanging out at my house after school one day. My house backed up to a street that often had roadkill on it due to being right alongside a huge swath of woods. At this point, I knew that my revenge was going to include Griffin's brand new truck. This truck was literally all he could talk about because it was custom. His parents got it for him as an early graduation present, and apparently it was super expensive. It was perfect. Bottom line is, he loved that truck more than anything he had ever had. I'm not a car person, so I have no idea what the truck was or if it was even good. But I do know that it was really, really tall. Like, you couldn't see the top of it, which ended up being bad for Griffin, but fantastic for this case of revenge. There was this big, super dead possum on the road behind my house, one that had been there for what seemed like a week. Normally the town was good about sending the guy down our road to pick up the roadkill, so it had been there long enough for me to notice it, which that didn't happen often. I was staring at the SDP because, well, it was there. I'm staring, Matt starts staring, then Henry starts staring. We start talking about Griffin while we're all staring at this disgusting pile. We're talking and just getting madder and madder before I feel myself cross that threshold into livid. However, I calm down when I realize we have an amazing opportunity in front of us. Gentlemen, we're going to bag that SDP and put it in Griffin's truck. This wouldn't be quite that simple, so we start brainstorming how we can fully get away with this. Griffin lived in a part of town where it would be faster for him to walk to school instead of drive. A shortcut through the woods to the school, that'll do it for you. But driving to school meant that he had to go 20 miles per hour or slower, and one of our town cops was always out because of how the schools were placed, so no speeding. Still, this trip barely took any time, but it was longer than the route of the shortcut. Griffin, of course, drove to school, so we had our plan. I snuck out that night, met Matt and Henry wearing all black and a mask. We bagged up the SDP, which was the most disgusting thing I've ever done, and then we drove to Griffin's. We parked a bit away and then went through the woods to the back of Griffin's house, lugging that bag of putrid nonsense. This was before the time where a lot of people had cameras on their property, so we didn't have to worry about anything besides floodlights on the side of the house. We decided to put the SDP on top of the truck, knowing that Griffin wouldn't be able to see it. He wouldn't be able to drive it like an asshole. And he wouldn't be taking this truck anywhere besides school. So that SDP was f***ing bloated. And if any of you are at all familiar with bloated roadkill, you may know where this is going. SDP was heavy and wasn't going to budge until this revenge was done. The next day at school, Griffin parks in the student lot like normal. We all go to class like normal. I went through that day gleefully awaiting the final bell, knowing that Griffin was in for a rather nasty surprise. This is happening 2 weeks before graduation in a very southern state. It was hot as fuck where I grew up, with 90% humidity on top of it. So that bloated SDP on top of Griffin's truck? That thing did what an old bloated SDP is going to do, which is explode. If you've never experienced this smell, I hope that you never do. The final bell rang. Matt, Henry, and I strategically placed ourselves a bit behind Griffin so we could see him once he got to his truck. Once you made it to the parking lot, you made it to the smell. It was horrible. People were gagging, frantically looking around, trying to find the source, all while covering their nose and sprinting to their cars. I knew this plan was going to satisfy my revenge, but never imagined this level of chaos. Griffin gets to his car, and because SDP has exploded, he definitely notices it now. Also, his windows were cracked, and the juices had seeped from the roof, down the windows, and inside the siding of the doors. There was no way he was driving home, so he had to call a tow. Griffin even started vomiting because he had stood too close to his truck for a bit too long. Matt, Henry, and I were in the music programs and often stayed late, so we stuck around for this whole fiasco. I don't think anyone really noticed us, and we got to see everything. Griffin manages to get on the phone calling his parents crying, telling them that his truck has been destroyed, and we could hear his dad yelling from the speaker. Eventually the tow guy arrives and the guy gags, but he's able to get the truck loaded up and out of the parking lot. At this point, Griffin had been yelling, crying, vomiting about his truck long enough that the people left at school knew what had happened, and by the following morning, that meant that everyone else at school knew. When Griffin made it to the campus the next day, his parents and a guy in a suit were with him. A lot of people knew Matt and I had issues with Griffin. Matt got called to the principal's office, but never me. I'll never know the exact reason for this, but it's most likely a combination of not having any physical evidence against Matt or myself, and that no one imagined that a woman would be involved in a retaliation scheme that was so disgusting. Griffin, his parents, and guy in suit tried to throw weight around to get some type of punishment for what happened, but there wasn't really anything the school could do to appease them, without knowing who did it or having evidence that it happened at school. There were cameras at school, and it was clear that Griffin arrived at school with the SDP already on his car. Everyone totally knew that Griffin's car was destroyed by Matt and likely by me, but Henry was never associated with it. There was no reason to suspect him. With no proof, though, no one could actually say anything. After that day, people stopped calling me names, and I was mostly ignored until I moved away. If people did have to talk to me, they were polite and to the point. I was told years later that people were genuinely terrified of Matt and I because plenty of shit had been said, so everyone thought that they might be next. Apparently, that SDP was quite effective. Pretty sure Griffin's truck ended up entirely unusable, but I don't know what they did with it. I only know that they spent a lot of time and a decent amount of money trying to get that smell out with little to no luck. Wouldn't be surprised if every car detailing service within 100 miles was used. Griffin didn't speak to Matt or me for the remainder of my time in town. He stopped sitting with us, stopped going to events that we were going to be at, and never tried to invite us to church again. I was only around through the middle of summer, but it was long enough to witness a noticeable difference in Griffin's behavior. The graduation ceremony arrived, and being a year younger, I was in the crowd cheering for my friends. This was completely unplanned, but I get giddy picturing his face decades later. I managed to make eye contact with Griffin after he was done walking across the stage, and quickly made an explosion motion with my hands and winked. I think he knew exactly what I meant. The only true drop the mic and I'm out moment that I've ever had. In high school, I met someone my freshman year who would end up becoming my best friend by the end of the year, Frank. We were an outcast, but we weren't exactly popular kids either. We were the metalhead kids who hung out in the wood shop and had our small circle of friends. I think every high school in America has this group. It's just the hangout area changes. Frank's dad was out of the picture, and his stepdad I thought was an asshole. But looking back, he was just trying to stop Frank from being a total fuck-up, and constantly told him that once he turned 18 and graduated high school, he was out of the house and on his own. Like I said at the start, come senior year, Frank was by far my closest friend. Every weekend, we'd hang out playing Smash Bros. Or sneaking into the movies to see whatever random horror flick was out. I wasn't going to let my best friend end up on the streets, and my family owns a big house with a couple of extra bedrooms. So of course, when the time comes, he can come live with us while he figures out what he's going to do with his life. Living in my house back then was me, my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, and my younger cousin, who we'll call YC. YC was 5 years younger than me, so she was 13 when Frank moved in. Frank's a year older than me, so he was 19. My cousin lived with me all my life, so she was much more like a little sister to me than a cousin. So she was included in a lot of my life. We'd let her watch movies with us, hang out with the boys. I knew YC had a bit of a crush on Frank, but that never made me think twice, given that I think it's normal for a freshly minted teenager to think someone a little older might be cute. I had started college by this time and also gotten a part-time job. Frank was taking some BS classes at the local JC, but otherwise not really doing shit. But again, he was my best friend, so I just let him figure it out. A lot of people take a year off after high school. That's not an abnormality. One weekend, about 3 months after he had moved in with us, we, along with a few other friends, went to an Iced Earth show and were having a blast in the pit. Frank took a break and was just standing on the outside of the pit when this guy who was at least 400 pounds got knocked back and fell over straight into Frank's knee. ACL torn right there. Frank had to have surgery and was basically going to be off his feet for a while during this time. We all did what we could to keep him comfortable, but YC? She pampered him. She would bring him food and anything else he needed, and was basically his own personal nurse. This is the part where I start to feel some shame because I let this happen, mainly because, well, I didn't want to be the one doing it. As time went on, it became harder to ignore just how much time YC was spending in Frank's room. She'd bring him food, sit in there while he ate it, and more often than not, she wouldn't come back out for hours. I mean, the guy was injured, she was helping, but after a while it started to feel rather off. You could tell that people were thinking the same thing, even if no one really wanted to say it out loud. Now, this was back in the early 2000s. at a time where not everyone had a cell phone yet, but both Frank and YC did. Frank had one so his mom could check in on him after the injury. YC had one because her mom, she treated her more like a friend than a daughter and basically gave her whatever she wanted. You guys remember those old Nokias? Play Snake on that thing? Those. Well, one day, the landline went out, and I needed to make a call. YC had left her phone at home. This was still a time where teachers could still confiscate them, so she didn't often bring it to school. When I picked it up, I saw she had 10 unread texts, all from Frank. Now, I knew they'd gotten close, but 10 texts in a row back then? That wasn't normal. That was like $8 worth of texts. So I looked at them, and I wish I hadn't. There were months and months of messages. I love you. I can't wait to see you. No one will be home at this time. Everyone will be asleep. Come sneak in. I saw red. If Frank had been in the house at that moment, I honestly think I would have beaten him until I couldn't feel my hands. But instead, he was at a doctor's appointment with his mother. I punched a hole straight through my closet door. After I calmed down and after realizing that I think I'd nearly broken my hand, I started thinking, if I beat him up, so what? He'd heal. If I called the cops right then, my little cousin would deny everything. And the text alone, those wouldn't necessarily prove anything physical was happening. I knew that I needed something more. Every year my family has a Christmas party about a week before Christmas. We rotate houses, and that year it was at my great aunt's place, about an hour away. YC had already said that she wasn't going. That was my window. The 2 weeks leading up to that party were torture. I had to act like everything was normal. I avoided both of them as much as I could because I knew that if I spent too much time around either of them, I'd lose it. Finally, the day came. I told my family that I'd take my own car up because I needed to stop at the store first. My mom, aunt, and grandma all left together. Frank and YC stayed home. I did go to the store, but not for what I told them. There was a payphone outside. I called the cops. Now, I'll admit it, I was gambling. I had no idea if they'd actually catch them in the act, but it was worth the risk. I drove back home and parked, and about 5 minutes later, a cop car pulled up. 2 officers got out, and I explained everything. The texts, what I believed was happening, and I gave them permission to enter the house. The moment we stepped inside, I heard it. It was very clear what was happening. The cops rushed toward the bedroom, threw that door open, and they saw exactly what I had suspected. About 20 minutes later, after a lot of screaming and crying, Frank was in handcuffs and being led out of the house. My cousin was losing her mind, calling me every name she could think of, saying that she loved him, saying that I had ruined her life. I knew that what I had done had to be done, but you're still a human, and I won't lie, her words did get to me right then and there. When someone you see as a little sister looks at you like that, saying those things, there's not really a way that it doesn't sting, even when you know you did the right thing. Frank was charged with aggravated sexual assault of a child, unlawful sexual intercourse with a minor, and forcible acts of sexual penetration. That first charge, that alone could have put him away for life. But he had no prior record, and he ended up taking a plea deal instead of going to trial. He was sentenced to 15 years, but I think when it was all said and done, only served about 7 of them. Still, he's a registered sex offender and a felon for life. My cousin hated me for years after that, but eventually she started going to therapy, and over time she came to understand what happened to her, what he did to her, was wrong. She forgave me, and I've never regretted what I did for a moment. Edit for clarification. Some people seem to think that Frank had some kind of traumatic upbringing, and that's not the case. Yeah, his bio dad wasn't around and his stepdad was strict, but that's it. His mom loved him dearly. His stepdad cared about him too. He was just hard on him because Frank didn't take school seriously. And I think the stepdad sensed that kid was heading down the wrong path. He also had 2 younger sisters, one the same age as YC, the other 2 years younger. As far as I know, Frank had a normal life. His parents loved him. They gave him money, they spent holidays together, they even bought him a car. The dude wasn't abused, he wasn't deprived. He had everything that he needed in his upbringing. Why he felt compelled to do what he did, I'll never understand. And because I've never spoken another word to this man, there's no way that he can give me an explanation that'll make sense. I see a lot of people start their stories off with an introduction, but fuck that. I'm jumping straight into this. The year was 2014, and I was a freshman in high school. On a general basis, it sucked. I mean, it was an American public high school with literally thousands of kids. It's a given that it's going to blow some major balls. One thing in particular that made it extra sucky, though, was gym class. Specifically, this one guy in gym class. This dude's name was Jack A. McGee. The A, of course, being short for ass. As the name would imply, he certainly was one. At first, it was pretty standard high school guy in gym class level of obnoxious prick. You know, overly loud, unreasonably aggressive during games, bossy, tossing the collective brain cell back and forth between his two equally ape-like buddies. The usual. I don't know when exactly it happened, but he developed a sort of eye for me. After the first couple of weeks of class or so, he started asking me bizarre questions that I now believe may have been some sort of innuendo, sitting uncomfortably close to me, resting his hand on my gym shoe. Just general creepy behavior. Once he opted to block a doorway with his body. This dude was massive, forcing me to literally squeeze my way through and almost crawl over him. He then tried to grab me and pin me to his body once I was almost through, but I'm pretty good at dodging physical contact whenever possible, and I dipped on him before his giant gorilla arm could catch me. I still shudder a bit thinking about it. I also cannot emphasize enough just how terribly this dude smelled. But the true breaking point came during the peak cruelty of his school-mandated sadism. Gym swim. Before anyone asks, let it be known that yes, I did try to tell someone about his behavior. I told my gym teacher first semester, really early on, that Jack was making me incredibly uncomfortable. The gym teacher waved it off, saying he was just playing around and that it's probably because he likes you. His suggestion was basically to just put up with it and wait it out because he was sure Jack would lose interest soon anyway. Spoiler alert, he didn't. Second semester rolls around and the 4-week period of gym swim descends upon us like the bloated carcass of a catapulted whale, crushing us beneath its wet, foul-smelling body. 40 some odd adolescents forced into a cold, overly chlorinated pool for 50+ minutes, adorned in swimsuits determined to crawl up into our assholes like Ant-Man himself. It was basically hell on earth. As I've mentioned in a previous post, or as some of you may have picked up from here, I'm autistic, so the echoing sounds, reflected fluorescent lights, pungent odors, slimy floor, and assorted BS made the situation even worse for me personally. I wasn't officially diagnosed at the time, so my complaints were written off as me being whiny, and I was told to, once again, shut up and deal with it. So I did. I think I had more meltdowns in that 4-week span than I've had in the past 2 years combined, but whatever. On top of the sensory overload, let's not forget Jack. I think something about being allowed to go shirtless and stare at the nearly bare asses of girls for an entire period emboldened him, because Jack promptly lost whatever semblance of restraint he'd had until then. He made frequent attempts at grabbing me, trying to hold me against his bare skin, which was disgusting, and I spent most of the class just trying to evade him. The swimsuit I was forced to wear fit a little awkwardly around my chest, which he delighted in pointing out to his buddies, staring unabashedly at my tits. He managed to sneak up behind me and snap the strap of my swimsuit, even trying to pull it down off my shoulder, but I pulled away fast enough to prevent that. I was furious at this point, but I'm like 5'2", maybe, whereas he was easily over 6'5", likely 300 pounds, and I'm not stupid. While all of this was happening, my new gym teacher, they switched every semester, was busy trying to keep a couple of other guys from drowning each other. She was one adult forced to watch over 40 rowdy-ass kids in a swimming pool. She was a bit preoccupied. Well, the final straw came one Wednesday afternoon. The event that finally pushed me off the edge of the rationality I'd been clinging to and sent me plummeting into full-on bloodthirst. There I was, paddling around minding my own business, when Jack and his 2 goons managed to corner me. I'm immediately suspicious, hackles raised as they asked me fairly banal questions about how the pool is today and the like, snickering the entire time. I gave short, terse answers, trying to see if maybe I could just slip by them. I spot an opening and bolt for it, but Jack was apparently betting on this. As I try to swim through the narrow gap between he and one of his friends, he stretches an arm out and actually manages to slip a hand under my suit and grab my breast. I froze for a moment, the delighted giggling of him and his friends echoing in my ears as if 1,000 miles away. The next thing I knew, I was out of the pool being held back by my gym teacher, and Jack had a bloody nose. He was shouting angrily at me, calling me a crazy bitch, as his nose gushed blood all into the water. There was mass confusion among the class. I was told to change quickly and sit out in the hallway. Apparently, the gym teacher had heard me screech like a banshee, followed by a number of shouts, and had looked over to see me wrestle out of Jack's grip, jump on his back, throw him off balance enough to smash his face into the edge of the pool wall. I remembered none of this, but I did find a few chunks of greasy brown hair clenched in my fist that I'd evidently ripped from his scalp when the teacher pulled me off. I'd washed my hands thoroughly. It was decided that I'd go in early to school tomorrow to have a little talk with the dean. They would have just sent me there straight away, but gym was my last class of the day and the dean had already left by then for whatever reason. So that meeting had to be postponed a little while. It was pretty heavily implied that I was going to be suspended, quite possibly even expelled for what had happened. I was furious. Not only had Jack made my life a living hell, but this pile of horse was now going to be the cause of my expulsion? I wasn't going to go down without a fight, but I realized that I'd have to play this pretty smart if I wanted to weasel my way out of it. The next morning, I did two things. I put on mascara, and I made a superficial but rather painful incision on my right thigh, high enough so as to be covered by my shorts. Normally, I hate wearing makeup because I don't really like the way it feels, but I'd worn mascara before and noticed the interesting effect that it had on my appearance. Specifically, I already have pretty long, pretty dark eyelashes, so adding mascara draws a lot of attention to my eyes and makes them look huge. Total Bambi eyes. Wide, innocent, naive, and harmless. I sat down in front of the dean at 6:45 a.m. I didn't need to fake the fear in my expression, but I made sure to throw in something that could be interpreted as guilt too, bowing my head and twisting my face in dismay. Needless to say, the dean was pretty pissed. "Do you know why you're here, young lady?" he said. "Yes, I do." "And you know what you did is very serious." "Yes," I said again, making my voice tremble this time. "Do you care to explain yourself?" I began, my voice shaking. "I just wanted him to stop." "Stop what?" the dean prompted, his eyebrows furrowed. I just wanted him to stop touching me," I blurted. As I said this, I reached my hand under the table where he couldn't see it, and I dug my finger into the cut on my leg, causing me to lurch forward as if in a sob, my other hand covering my face as my eyes watered from the pain. "Touching you?" the dean asked, his brows now on a collision course for Mars. I spent the next several minutes divulging all the that had happened to me that year, digging into my injury for some tears whenever necessary. And by the end of it, the dean looked horrified. He reaffirmed that no, I shouldn't have attacked Jack like that, but that they'd have to investigate the matter further. I basically got off with a slap on the wrist, and after multiple testimonies from other girls, Jack was suspended for 2 weeks. I wasn't satisfied though. They hadn't been able to expel him due to lack of hard evidence, but I was now out for blood. He returned to school 2 weeks later, and I was ready. One of his friends had a little brother in my bio class, a fairly chill dude named Owen, who I had worked out a deal with. See, Jack had been very vocal about his displeasure with me to his friends, which made its way to Owen, who, for the low price of bailing his dumbass out in biology, was more than willing to share that information with me. I had a direct pipeline. Anything Jack shared with his friends made its way directly to me via Owen, and as it turns out, this dude didn't keep a whole lot to himself. There was a lot of I was tempted to nail him for. For instance, I found out that he was selling drugs, mostly Adderall and some occasional weed from his locker, and had been cheating his way through most of his classes. However, I knew how suspicious it would look for me to report something like that so soon. It'd probably just look like I had a grudge, which I did, and I was trying to get even, which I was. He slipped up really badly about a week after his return, though, and that's when I struck. See, he hadn't been subtle about his displeasure with my retaliation and spent most of gym class sending really ugly looks my way. The gym teacher kept us as far away from each other as possible, but he managed to track me down in a passing period one day and rant at me about how I had screwed him over and that I was a lying little bitch, yada yada yada, and that he'd make me regret it. Funny, stole the words right out of my mouth. I found out from Owen later that Jack had been bragging to his friends last night about the switchblade he'd stolen from one of those hunting stores downtown and promised that he'd show it off to them later that day. I took that opportunity. I spent a few seconds in the bathroom mirror scratching at the scab on my leg until my eyes were teary enough to really sell the terrified victim look. Then I bolted down to the dean's office, stuttering and shaking, crying out for help. The front desk lady was understandably startled by the sight of a seemingly panicked freshman girl bolting into the office and called out to the dean right away. His face grew serious when he saw me. "Whoa, slow down," he said. "What happened?" "Jack," I said, resisting the urge to grin maniacally at the hardness that appeared in the dean's eyes. He cornered me in the hall. He called me a bitch and said he was going to make me regret telling on him. He's got a knife." "He what?" From that point on, everything moved quickly. The campus security guards were told to search the kid's locker, while a couple of other security officers were called down to get Jack out of his classroom and take him to the office. I was told by the front desk lady, who had heard the entire exchange, to hide with her in the copier room so Jack wouldn't see me coming or going. They found the stolen knife in his backpack, along with drugs in his locker. That, combined with his previous charges, was enough to get him not only expelled, but arrested. I never saw Jack again, which is probably a good thing because I'm still mad myself and wouldn't trust myself to not get physical if ever given the opportunity. In my opinion, dude got what he had coming. He likely has a claim that my actions ruined his life, but my actions were only prompted by his own, so I'm not losing any sleep over them.